Travelers, what is your creepiest hotel story? Story 1. I did the couchsurfing.com thing with a friend a few years back. We're both big guys, so we usually feel pretty safe wherever we go. We arrived at the house. A 60-year-old guy opened the door while chatting on the phone, wearing only sweatpants. He gestured for us to come in and kept talking on the phone, ending with an "I love you." Then he turned to us, welcomed us, and apologized for being on the phone. He started discussing his girlfriend, who he was talking to, mentioning that she lived overseas. He boasted about having several girlfriends and claimed to be a ladies' man. Then he began showing us pictures. These girls seemed really young. While scrolling through the photos, he accidentally revealed one of their passports. This made us extremely uncomfortable. We were in our early 20s and we weren't sure what to do, so we told him we were tired and wanted to sleep. He walked us to the room while rubbing his belly and mentioned about making breakfast in the morning. We chose to spend the night but planned to leave before he woke up. My friend slept blocking the bedroom door so he couldn't come in and noticed. We woke up very early and left in a rush. I felt really uncomfortable about the guy and disgusted about the whole situation. Story 2. When I was just in kindergarten, my family stayed at the Cedar Lodge Motel where Cary Stayner worked just before he took the lives of 4 women. We drove to Yosemite, quite a long trip for us with 3 little kids and 2 adults and surrounded by mountains. By the time we got to the motel, it was late. We were all grumpy and eager to get out, but the instant we arrived, something made my mom uneasy. She insisted we leave and find another hotel, reservation or not. My mom has always had something like a sixth sense. It's actually saved us a few times. But my dad was tired and persuaded her to ignore her gut feelings and stay just for the night, saying we'd leave the next morning. I remember my mom refusing to let go of our hands, keeping us close as she looked around while checking in. To ease her nerves, my dad thought going to the pool might help her relax. When we arrived, there were no towels, so my mom called the front desk. When the man bringing the towels arrived, my mom hurriedly got us out of the water and took us back to the room. She told us the man made her extremely uncomfortable, and she felt a sense of pure evil when he looked at us. That night, my mom and dad pushed the dresser to block the door and we all slept in the same bed. The next morning, we left for another hotel, but my mom couldn't stop talking about how sinister that motel felt. About 2 months later, she and my dad were up late watching the news when they reported about a man who had harmed a woman and 2 young girls in Yosemite. Just as my mom started to say, "I bet it was that motel," they showed Cary Stayner's face and mentioned it happened at the Cedar Lodge Motel. Cary Stayner was the man who brought us towels at the pool. We've never returned to Yosemite, and my mom always tells us to listen to our gut feelings. And every bone in our body screams that something's off, get the hell out of there. This is an excellent case of a gut feeling saving people from losing their guts. Story 3. Mine happened in a London hotel a few weeks ago. I was with 2 male friends and we booked a 9-bed mixed dorm. There were 3 sets of 3-tier bunk beds. I was in the bottom bed of the right bunk, friend 1 was on top of my bunk, and friend 2 was in the bottom bed of the middle bunk. We arrived at 2 a.m. and quietly settled into our beds. After a few minutes of lying there attempting to sleep, I heard rustling behind me. I was lying on my side facing the wall. I figured it was someone rummaging through their bag and brushed it off. Next, I felt a hand on my hip over the covers. I turned around and saw a random guy telling me to move over while tugging at my blanket. At first, I thought I might be hammered and confused about his bed, so I told him to go find his own bed. He then shuffled away to the bottom bed of the left bunk. Then he came back again. I repeated, telling him to go back to his own bed, and he shuffled back there. This repeated a couple of times, with me gradually speaking louder and getting less polite, insisting that he stay away. I was shaking because the situation made me nervous. I messaged my friend in the top bunk, saying I didn't think I'd be able to sleep that night. He casually messaged back, thinking it was due to someone snoring. That's when I realized both my mates had earplugs in. Even though they heard me speaking, they each thought I was talking to the other friend. So I explained the situation and he started keeping an eye out. I heard the guy go to the bathroom that's en route, but I could tell from the light that he left the bathroom door open, and I refused to look. My friend informed me that the guy was walking around with his pants down, deliberately leaving the door open to get me to look. Either way, the guy returned to his bed after that and we thought the situation was finally over. Then it happened again. My friend who was keeping an eye out shone his phone light on the floor and shouted for the guy to get away. Apparently the guy was crawling across the floor again, heading towards me. The guy suddenly got mad at my mate, shining the light on him, and started climbing the bunk ladder to reach my friend in the top bunk, attempting to grab his phone. They struggled for a while, my friend even kicking the guy to keep him away. However, the guy swung back and came at him again. I took that moment to dash for security. When they arrived, they found the guy still clinging to the bed. They called the police, who arrived and took the guy away in a riot van, banning him from the building. When the police had him outside waiting for the riot van, the guy even hit his head in the brick wall several times. No clue what that guy was on because it wasn't booze. He's definitely on something to take a kick to the neck and act like nothing happened afterward. When security arrived, the guy kept trying to blame my mate, speaking broken English like, "Come up here and see how violent this guy is." My other mate, who slept through the whole thing, said the next day that he couldn't believe how friendly everyone in London was. Story 4. The company would book us into the Shiloh Inn downtown whenever we were in Salt Lake City. One night, a coworker of mine was woken up by the noise of kids in the hallway. It continued for so long that he decided to open the door and ask them to quiet down. except when he did, the hallway was completely empty. He could still hear the children. So, assuming they were in the adjacent room, he called the front desk to complain. The man assured him no kids were staying in that floor, but said the noise would stop soon. He offered to send up some earplugs. My coworker felt a bit annoyed, hearing kids but being told there were none. He went back to bed and eventually fell asleep. The following day, during checkout, a different clerk asked the routine question, "Was everything satisfactory with your stay?" My coworker gave her an earful about the noisy kids and how the previous clerk had dismissed his complaints. The clerk seemed uneasy and whispered, "We're not supposed to discuss our history with guests, but please, do a Google search for Rachel David, and you'll understand what happened to you. We receive similar complaints every few weeks, and we try to avoid putting kids on that floor." In the van on the way to the airport, he read the story on his phone. It must have felt dreadful to realize that hotel you're sleeping in was the final resting place for a family, its walls forever tied to their tragic end. Did this make you feel a bit scared? Don't worry, because story 8 is even scarier. The person there had an unwelcome visitor. Story 5. I arrived late at a hotel for a business trip. Our flight had a problem, so we had to land, but we stayed in the plane. I had my room paid for, the confirmation number ready and all. It was $19.99. I had a cell phone, a StarTAC flip phone, which was pretty cool at the time. I used to wear it in a belt holster like Robin Williams in the movie Hook. I can call the hotel from the tarmac because the reception inside the plane was terrible. We landed at a small airport in Tennessee, maybe called Myrna or something similar. All I can recall is it sounded like an unattractive girl's name. Cell towers weren't that widespread back then, especially in places away from big cities. I didn't ring the hotel when we landed, as the hotel was in Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. I wasn't traveling solo. I was on a later flight since I was part of the planning crew. There was a massive meeting. My team had already booked and paid for a bunch of rooms well before the event. They mentioned ongoing renovations, but I didn't pay much attention. I had a presentation on stage in about 5 hours from when I arrived. I needed some shut-eye and a place to freshen up and take a dump. I arrived about 5 hours later than planned, and of course, they gave my room to someone else. I was already unhappy with all the delays and wasn't budging. The event I needed to attend was in that hotel. I really needed my room. I stayed polite but very firm, so they rushed around and asked if I'd take a damaged room being fixed up. My reply was, as long as the sheets are clean for bed, I'm good. Big mistake. The room they gave me was like a crime scene. The case was closed, so there was no legal problem, but someone had passed away or was badly hurt in that room. They covered up the red stains in the walls and ceiling, but just taped semi-clear plastic over the big stain in the carpets. The walls had lots of small holes that were patched and sanded, but you could still see multiple small holes in the walls. They gave me a brand new bed and TV from their stock, so I was comfortable, but it was super creepy. The creepiest part was the priming job. It was obviously red splatter. You could see how they had tried to get up and where they'd finally collapsed. The next day, they gave me a different room. I hadn't unpacked much and made sure I was fully packed before heading to the meeting rooms. The hotel sorted out moving everything from the room with a past incident to the new one. I grabbed new keys at the front desk. I really wanted to take pictures, but I didn't have a camera. StarTAC flip phones couldn't do that. Surprisingly, I had never thought about the possibility of self-inflicted until someone else here mentioned it. Looking back on it now, that might have been the case. I've been sharing this tale for almost 20 years. I'll consider that possibility from now on. Don't have any witnesses, it's just an incredibly odd and true story. This was before Google, before TripAdvisor and such. The internet was there, but it was sites like ron.com and ebombsworld.com. Quite different from what it is today. Story 6. I was staying in Birmingham, Alabama at Hyatt. Nothing unusual, nothing obviously creepy. One night around 2 a.m. I woke up to a man screaming, like a scream from a horror film. I sat there, panicked, debating whether I should call someone, but when I didn't hear anything else, I thought maybe it was just a dream. The next night I woke up at around 3 a.m., feeling terrible, like someone was in my room. I turned over and saw an old man sitting on the AC. It was boxed in, smoking and facing away from me. It looked like a man in his 60s, about 5'8", overweight, wearing blue coveralls and a red checkered shirt. His sleeves were rolled up. He had a balding head with a white halo, a gray mustache, and bushy eyebrows. I stared at him for a few seconds, and when he turned to look at me, I shot up out of bed, ready to run, only to find that he was gone. No one was there. I wonder what that man's face could have been like. Was it graced with a charming smile? Or was it etched with something so menacing that it would make you run for your life? Story 7. We found a hotel in Yangon, Burma, on the day we arrived for a pretty low price. They mentioned the rates were low due to maintenance and several floors. We slept fine, woke up and went to breakfast. While having breakfast, we met some Germans who had also stayed at our hotel. They mentioned they hadn't slept well because someone woke them up to move them from the floor they were on in the middle of the night. We, us and the Germans, later discovered they were moved because they were on one of the floors reserved for maintenance. Part of the maintenance involved fumigating the rooms for bugs. In the middle of the night, they were going around the rooms, inserting the gas nozzle or something similar under the doors and letting it run. Sadly, this resulted in the accidental deaths of 2 people in the room next to the Germans before they realized they'd mistakenly booked guests on that floor. Fortunately, we weren't on that floor, but how easily we could have been involved in that situation has always stuck with me. Story 8. A chalet in either Maine or Vermont with 3 others. The lady at the front desk seemed about 1 billion years old with cloudy eyes, and her front desk was a small table next to a recliner in a room filled with knickknacks and china dolls. The room itself was what I imagined a hotel room from the 1940s might look like. Clearly, it had never been remodeled. The bathroom featured a metal claw foot tub. However, the most unsettling part was the door at the back of the room. I initially thought it might be another closet, but upon opening it, we found nothing but cold darkness. Using the flashlight on our phones, we discovered a long, wide hallway with cement walls. I assumed it was used to travel between rooms during bad weather, but the vibe it emitted made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The night passed without incident, yet I still feel like we survived a night in a mundane horror movie. I've attempted to find it again, but without any success. I had to ask my grandma, who booked the trip, for more details. Turns out we were actually in Vermont. I'm still a bit puzzled about the timeline of my trip, but it was Dallam Chalet in Brattleboro. And please refrain from leaving reviews or anything of that sort. I'd rather not have the creepy ghost lady pay me a visit at night. Here's a review of the place in orbits. The room was okay. The bathroom was clean and modern, but a couple of things bothered us. Firstly, there was flies in the room. Not many, but we had to swat several before going to sleep. Each room had a back door leading to an unlit hallway. Upon our arrival, the door in our room was unlocked and wide open. We closed and locked it, but in our second room, the back door was closed but unlocked, so we locked it again. When we returned later that evening, the door was once more unlocked. Needless to say, we were spooked. We hadn't left anything in the rooms during the evening, so nothing was taken or disturbed. But still, not going back. Story 9. I was traveling out of the country right after completing a massive 5-day work event where I'd managed only about 10 hours of sleep in total. I arrived at the motel, which was somewhat run down with damp carpets and blankets, but I was so exhausted I hardly paid it any mind. I fell asleep almost immediately, around 8 p.m. local time. Around 11 p.m. or so, I received a call from the motel phone stating there had been a noise complaint. I assured them it was impossible as I had been sleeping. They questioned if perhaps someone else was in the room, but I confirmed that I was alone and no one else was making noise. They asked once more if I was sure I was alone and not causing any disturbance. I reiterated that I was indeed alone and not making any noise. I then fell back asleep immediately. When I woke up and thought about it, I realized how strange the conversation had been. There was absolutely no noise audible from anywhere nearby, and I couldn't understand whether motel staff needed to confirm that I was alone repeatedly. It turns out they never made that call. I believe someone might have been phoning various rooms to check who was inside and how many people were there. I've never been more grateful for always using that extra latch chain lock. Always lock your doors, for you never know if unwelcome guests will pay you a visit. Or better yet, keep yourself company with my stories. Give this video a like and subscribe to my channel today. I've got more scary tales waiting for you. Story 10. When I was young, my mom and I were staying at a motel during a road trip in Texas. We were in the middle of nowhere, and we chose a motel with a decent rating in our guidebook. It was cheap, so we decided to stay there. In the middle of the night, the owner knocked on the door and insisted we leave because he wanted the room for someone else. While my mom was outside arguing with him, I was inside gathering our things, feeling terrified as I could hear him start yelling. I glanced out the window and saw around 6 bikers in vests seemingly emerging out of nowhere, perhaps from a nearby room, and started confronting the owner. My mom rushed inside and we observed them confronting the man, saying things like, "She's paid to stay here. You let her stay tonight. We don't want to hear anything like this from you again." Meanwhile, the owner was pleading, "I don't want any trouble." Everyone left fairly quickly, and the next day at checkout there was no mention of the incident. We couldn't sleep well due to being so shaken up, but it was better than getting back in the car. Story 11. We stayed at a B&B in Pennsylvania that initially seemed charming. Apart from a wall adorned with antique dolls in the main room, there were no apparent signs of oddness. However, once settled in the room, I noticed scratches on the floor near a bookcase. Upon closer inspection, I discovered it was a secret door. When I asked the owner, who had this creepy vibe, if it was functional, he affirmed and revealed that it led to their cluttered office, filled with a computer and heaps of junk. The secret door had a lock on its side, but when I asked about a lock on my side, the owner smiled and replied, "No." I told him my concern about having an unsecured entrance to my room, concealed and undisclosed to me, but he just continued to smile without addressing my worries. So that night, we didn't get to be intimate. Fear of cameras, and I barricaded the freaking door and barely slept. It was many years ago, before the days of Facebook, Twitter, etc., so we're struggling to recall the name. All we can remember at this point is that it was near New Hope, Pennsylvania. You can never trust people or places based on appearances alone. Story 12. When I was young, my family vacationed in Europe. At our hotel in Rome, there was this incredible indoor pool. I was drawn to it, would have spent my entire vacation there if possible. During one of my swimming sessions, a random man, perhaps around 40-something, approached me and began tickling my feet. While my mother was present, she was occupied with one of my siblings. This man, who also spoke English, began teasing me for being ticklish, calling me simply adorable. Despite my shy requests for him to stop while giggling, he persisted. This lasted for maybe 2 minutes before my mom noticed and immediately went into super protective mode, telling him to back off. Story 13. I stayed at this posh B&B one night with a friend. The lady who owned it was lovely but had this strange way of popping up out of nowhere. We'd be sitting alone in a big room with only one doorway and she was suddenly there with us. It felt like this place had hidden passages or something unnerving happening. She appeared to be aware of what we had said or done, which was really unsettling. The most disturbing part was hearing someone attempting to open our door in the dead of night. Despite her being incredibly nice and the building being beautiful, we were relieved to check out the next morning. Story 14. My mom was on a business trip and struck up a conversation with a man, also a business traveler, on the plane. They chatted casually and swapped business cards. That night, while she was in her hotel room watching TV, she received a call from the front desk saying her husband was there and asking if they could provide him with a room key. It turned out that the creep from the plane had pretended to be her husband to gain access to her room. When you're out in this wicked world, keep your wits about you, or you might end up with an imposter in your room. Well, have you had enough of my terrifying tales, or do you want to watch more? Then go check out People Who Have Lived in a Haunted House. What are your paranormal experiences? Story 3 will keep you up at night. See you there.